All right. Okay. Hello, Samuel. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit more about about what you do right now?
Of course, I'm Sam, CEO of and founder of Third. I've been basically bringing synthetic data to the market research industry for 5 years now. So we sort of started this field. At the time, it was extremely niche. Now it's basically the thing that everyone is trying to explore and trying to understand like what are the potential benefits and risks. So it's super exciting for us. Before that, I did a master's and PhD on generative AI and simulation, basically building foundation architectures like for models. I also worked at Facebook AI Research Labs on these kinds of things. And yeah, since 5 years being entrepreneur at Virgin, and yeah, living through these very exciting times.
Who are your role models in the AI industry, and who are the people who you think are bluntly wrong?
Yeah. So it's a very complicated things because like everything is evolving so fast and also like these role models are sometimes being role models and sometimes basically not. So I think it really changes. But I've been really inspired by Elon Musk. I know he's incredibly controversial, but at the same time I really like from him that basically he thinks that anything is possible and like he doesn't accept no to basically something some claims of something not being possible. So he really tries to make things happen. And that sort of happened to us at Virgin, where 5 years ago, basically, we literally got all the doors knocked on our faces, with basically people saying that synthetic data and digital twins would never be a thing in this industry. And now we see like 5 years forward that basically the narrative completely changed and everyone's trying to explore. So I really like this side of his personality. I also basically respect a lot of the foundational AI researchers, that's like the people that led to like the technologies behind, for example, ChatGPT and so on. So one of them, his name is Ilya Sutskever. Actually, now he's like building a new company that's trying to build the next generation of these things. But these people that have actually built the sort of the groundwork and ground technology that's led to this massive adoption. So if you think about it, 10 years ago when I started getting into foundation research, AI research, like at the time we no one had a clue that it would become a massive like consumer revolution. Like we had no idea. And there's a lot of people that actually believe that and these people basically I deeply respect and we have all of this thanks to them.
Okay, fair. So, you mentioned 5 years ago you tried everything and everybody was a naysayer. What do you think
Yeah.
changed?
um, Technology and capabilities. So the main thing is 5 years ago, like foundational models were not in the hands of the general consumer. And so people were not used to use AI in their day to day. And then like November 2023, I believe, basically ChatGPT got released to the world, and then that started to change opinions because people started to have, for example, day-to-day tasks that were annoying before that now like ChatGPT could solve, and then and then that basically opens the mind of people that actually this kind of new technologies could actually be useful. Took a bit more time for them to be useful for work and for people to trust them for work, but now basically it's anyone that doesn't use like Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot in their day to day are just like crazy. And so the question always is like what is a frontier? Like where are my limits, right? And this limits got pushed back and back and back, and now basically we're in a point where the technologies we've been building are more and more accepted, and people understand that basically they need to push this frontier further to be able to deliver more value, and that's basically how what got us in this amazing point now of everybody wanting to explore. But now what I'm looking for is to get to the next step, which is basically adoption. So now we're in exploration. Before we're in education. Now we're in exploration, and I want to get to adoption, and that's what I'm pushing for.
Um, how does it look like? Imagine the
Yeah,
world where adoption has become the norm. What does it look like?
yeah. So what we're pushing for is 24/7 access to the consumer, which obviously is extremely powerful because if you think from let's simplify, let's focus only on consumer-oriented company, B2C companies, then basically anything they do and think about basically can be optimized through the consumer angle. Like what product to launch, what new flavor for my ice cream line, like this campaign, like where to whom should I focus this campaign, and what should be the narratives, the messaging, the creatives, and so on. So everything can be better optimized if you actually know what the consumer wants. The problem until now is that basically that kind of access was limited by time and cost. So now what we're pushing for is basically unlocking 24/7 access to the consumer for everything that can be optimized through the consumer lens. And that opens incredible capabilities. Now the challenge is like, anyone would think, okay, now I have ChatGPT or Claude, like I'm just gonna ask like what they think should be the right narrative for Gen Z is living in Ohio for this ice cream brand that I'm launching, right? But obviously the problem, like there's so many problems with doing that, and we can talk for hours about it. I'm sure we'll touch on this on this today. So we're trying to build the right version of the solution of this basically 24/7 consumer access needs.
So I've been in the industry, research industry for like really long time, right? So I saw that you're working with Big Village, right? It's
Yes.
one of the people who we work with. I used to work in another agency, and this agency was acquired by Big Village. So I don't know what they
Okay.
do right now, but I know how what some pockets of them do. And one of the things that I noticed that 10 years ago, we had exactly the same pitch about Recollective and online
Yes.
community, right? Where would say Recollective would do the same tour of of people and say, look, you can have in a community, it's always on and it's here for us, and it solves the problem of access to consumers, and it's there. So how is it different?
I'm gonna take an analogy that I always like to use. So if you think about like 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, people traveled on horses, right? And people that had access to basically travel, being able to travel on horses and carousels, basically they were obviously like empowered because they were able to travel longer distances. But it doesn't mean that they were able to go from I don't know, France to or whatever France was called at the time called to America, right? So they just couldn't, right? So it's all about with the current tools that I have in my hands, what is the frontier or the limits of what I can actually achieve, right? So there was horse, and then there was cars and planes and whatever, and spaceships like are coming, and so every time basically you're pushing the frontier further, and that's basically what I think is a strong analogy for what you're describing, where we first starting collecting like surveys like in person, getting people to answer questions in person with pen and paper, and then there was phone, which basically increased the scale, and then there was online surveys, and now there's basically what you can think of as predicted surveys or simulated surveys. That's another level of scale and capability where now you can afford to do this always on thing. And that's something that also you had communities that are always on. It doesn't mean that you could actually afford to use them 24/7. So it's all about the limits. One other analogy that I like, actually coming from Elon Musk that I mentioned earlier, is like he uses like this there is this famous scientist from the past called Kardashev that was basically saying that, like a civilization can be measured by how much energy and capacity they can get from um, the Earth, their solar system, their galaxy, and then beyond. And depending on how much resources you're managing to squeeze, the capabilities you have are obviously basically evolving. And that's basically what we're trying to do is evolve the capabilities and the possibilities of the people we work with from basically being limited to basically being boundless.
Yeah. So it sounds like that you are saying we can use the same amount of resources and the same
Yes,
amount of effort, but make the usage more effective.
that's correct.
Okay. So, another thing, 5 years ago, thinking about the timeline, we would listen to other vendors, right? And they would be like, you know what? We have great fraud detection problem.
Yeah.
Have zero bots, right? We make sure that nothing is there. So,
Yeah.
and it feels like the market has shifted from no bots to give me all the bots.
Yes.
What do you think
You're
about this? Yeah, what do you
absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And that's actually extremely bad, especially when you are using models that are trained on this data, because like actually they're just like exacerbating all these issues that you actually have in the data. So if you think about it, like let's say you're gonna use like the interview of someone to basically as part of like this model or digital twin of this person, whatever, and then you're gonna use this digital twin, for example, like for I don't know, 10 studies, 100 studies, and basically you 10x or 100x the problem that came with this respondent being fraudulent. And then the number of decisions that are going to rely on this interview of this person that basically was full of crap, right, is basically like exacerbated. So the problem is that I learned this in cyber. So 10 years ago, well, 9 years, yeah, 10, 11 years ago, I worked for some time in cyber in Israel in a company called Checkpoints, like historically the Israeli cyber company. And I learned something there. So my manager told me something that was amazing. Told me you can actually be as good as possible on the defense side. You're always gonna have someone on the other side that's actually gonna be stronger than you and that can penetrate the defense. You can only try to basically get close to the best in class to protect yourself as much as possible, but you're always gonna have someone better on the other side. But you can still reduce the chance of issues. So what I'm saying by that is that we need to evolve the defensive capabilities from the fraud perspective as fast or on a similar velocity as the offensive side is moving. And the problem with surveys is that basically there's an inherent like financial reward associated with surveys, which basically makes it an amazing candidate for fraud. And models are consistently evolving, so basically the incentive to fraud is increasing and increasing and increasing again. So we really need to take this very seriously as an industry. We do it ourselves. We also build tools for the community on fraud detection, but we need more and more of this. And there's brilliant companies like Verisul, for example, that we're using that help us basically do this part of the job better.
Hmm. Okay. So, you mentioned one of the very interesting ideas. You mentioned um, all concepts can be better if they consider consumer desires and consumer
Yes,
interest.
correct.
Um, are they? There's always like a good story from Ford Motors, right? Like people need better horses and faster horses, right? How how do we think about this?
I think about prioritization. So if you think about let's talk about me for example. For my job, like I have to travel a lot. Like I have to be on a lot of planes. Also, we're based in Israel, but most of our client base is in the US, Latam, and Europe. So I have to be on planes like maybe I take like 4 planes a month. So really bad for the carbon footprint, but I just have to do it. So if you think about me, I'm a really good customer of airplanes, right? So the question, but the thing is, like the question is how loyal, for example, am I to these airplanes, right? And the fact is like if an airplane manages to make me loyal, I'm gonna have a really strong lifetime value for them, right? Let's just take this example. So now the main thing is like I'm one segment of basically their consumer base, and and let's say that basically they want to activate my segment better of like power flyers, basically business power business flyers, for example. They need to understand what I need, what I care about, and then once they understand that, they can do a lot of things basically to get me to be loyal to them, starting from advertising campaigns, focusing on the things that matter to me, to personalized outreach, to whatever, like getting me on a promotion card like program. So there's many things you can do once you understand what I care about. There's one thing I care about maybe 5 times more than any other thing as part of the travel sort of space and flying space, which is Wi-Fi, actually. So especially when I have to be on a 12-hour plane and we have a lot of work and with AI now, like everything moves faster. I cannot be off a strong Wi-Fi for, I don't know, 12 or 15 hours. So just the fact of basically having a strong Wi-Fi is basically something that will significantly heighten the chances of me using this company to basically to travel and use the plane. So that's the kind of things that basically if you had like very deep access to wide amount of segments of the population and really understand what they care about and how it materializes, then basically they can be a lot more efficient with their time and money, right? So for example, for me, what mattered for me, what I want to be exposed to as ads, as an entrepreneur and CEO of a company that has to travel like nearly every week, I want to be exposed to things around services like Wi-Fi. I don't care whether the seats are long or there's spaces for my feet. What I care about is Wi-Fi. So I think that's a really good example of how having a deep consumer access, like that's 24/7 and that's really wide, basically, can allow to be way more effective in your business and grow your business basically more effectively and use resources better than before.
Hmm. So it almost sounds like a regression model, right? It's just like, so you have a
Correct.
consumer and they have like those
Yes.
points, and certain points have higher weight, right?
Yes.
Do I understand it correctly?
The Your understanding is correctly. So basically what we're doing, so let's talk about digital twins for a minute, which
Yes.
is usually like the instantiation of all of this. So let's think. So I have this way of categorizing synthetic data through two different dimensions. So first, like take a survey. So let's literally take this table, right? So it has like rows and columns. Rows are going to be respondents, and columns are going to be basically variables that are questions. Let's simplify, right? So there are solutions that are aiming to widen the table, so add more columns, right? So which means answers to new questions. And there are solutions that are about adding more rows, increasing the height or also depth. And that's basically I want to deep dive on a specific segment, for example, or and so on. So for both directions, basically, like you can use like the intuition of classification and regression basically applies. So I'm gonna use this table that I have, and I'm gonna use it to predict things that are gonna allow me to heighten the height or widen basically the width. So for example, if you know that, you know, if you know me and my profile and what I care about and blah blah blah, and then you can ask, okay, so now knowing all of this, between these three messaging options, which one should I prioritize? And then predict that basically. And that's gonna be and that's gonna be like some kind of basically predictive model that basically learned from a lot of data and uses both my data and all of the pre-training data, whatever this model was fed with before. Exactly.
Hmm. Okay. Very interesting. I'm going to it's very interesting. And I want to ask one more question about the philosophy before going into a very specific example, because this is very
Yeah.
interesting. So one of the like, questions that I have, so you compared it against surveys, against phone calls, and
Yes.
to me, it all sounds like quant solutions, not qual solutions. Do I hear
hmm
it correctly that you think that competitor to this is surveys?
So I'm gonna be um now like sort of answering in a way that's usually unexpected. So people try to compare us to surveys or market research companies and so on. Actually, I want to compare ourselves to what you get when you use Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot. That's my competitor. It's not surveys because we are powered by surveys. The more surveys a company has, the better our models are going to be at predicting new things. So and actually like these methodologies can also be used for qual. So we also simulate focus groups and all of these things. So what matters is more what data do we have, like to model these things and predict these things, and then what are we using it for? We are using it to field surveys, to simulate a focus group and basically open-ended like sort of conversations between respondent and a moderator. So that's basically how we think about it. And so we're not trying to compare ourselves to surveys. We're trying to compare ourselves to what would you get if we were basically using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot to make these decisions potentially slightly powered or with RAG to your internal reports and so on. But how does this compare? So that's basically the main thing. Because what we're saying is we're already running all these surveys. We can just squeeze the value out of them much more and basically go way beyond and just use the consumer in a lot more things. So instead of just running, for example, a segmentation study every 2 years and a couple of UNAs and ad tests when you can afford, actually run every single ad and ad campaign like through this tool. Run every product launch idea, every intervention on your customer experience, for example. So that's what I'm saying. And instead of trying to do this with ChatGPT with some context, actually do it the right way, and that's what we're uh, pushing for and competing against.
Understood. So, you know how very often you have basically deterioration of results, right? So, because company, like you always need to have like net new data. Otherwise, the set is going to have one of the synthetic responses, right? So,
Yes.
how do you think about this?
So in one sense, so what you're saying is, so can you maybe clarify
Yes.
the
So
question a
I'm going to
bit?
give you a very specific example. So I tried to build a synthetic twin, right? So and first I was like, well, I have like a couple of like, questions that I would love to run by you as well. But also like when I was trying to build synthetic twin using, my cloud knowledge and super base access and just like 11
Yeah,
focus groups, I was like,
yeah,
all right, so um the problem is every time when I ask a new question, the response getting worse and worse. And to a certain
yeah.
degree, they became like very like anybody could answer anything like this, you know? So
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I would say that this is most of the value we provide is around avoiding this. So I think we had this discussion, I think, at court where I explained to you like how we deal with irrationality and human
yeah.
emotions and all those things. So I think so we spent a lot of time basically trying to model this right. So there's let's start from the worst, which is basically the work like some groups are doing around synthetic personas, where you're gonna try to generate answers of a US Gen Z, for example, and like
Sure.
talking about snacks, like and maybe powered by some data, but basically like you have like so many averages of averages of averages. Like the model that you're using is an average of everything trained online plus some post-training data, RLs, HFs. So that's one. And there's averaging because you're averaging over all Gen Zs basically in the US, whatever in the opinion on snacks. And so basically you just get like an averaged out answer. Also, another massive issue is that this model that you use, like ChatGPT, for example, was literally post-trained to be pleasing to humans, literally. So just explaining quickly how these LLMs are actually trained, like how you get to ChatGPT. So first you take all of the wide like web, like all of the web data, basically everything that's on internet, and you curate it a bit, and then you train the model to predict the next token based on this training data. Okay, like so when you see this and this and this, and okay, what is the probable next word? Um, and then actually to make it actually useful, you go into what's called post-training. So what I described was pre-training and post-training. There's multiple parts, but the part I care about the most here is what's called RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. So basically, the way it works is you're gonna get real humans to get a prompt and two answers and say which one they prefer. Okay, and then you can use that to basically fine tune and optimize your model to be like on the preferred like track like most often. I'm just simplifying like hell here, but basically the point is that you're training the model to be pleasing and to get answers that basically will please the person. But here we're trying to get models that predict how humans will think of new products. We're not trying to please the person that is going to read this answer. And so all the inductive biases on basically being pleasing and overly positive and agreeing and so on, they're baked in so hard into these models that basically you're gonna get like things that are average and over positive and over agreeing. And that's massively problematic. So we did insane amount of work over the last 5 years and basically um, taking down each and every one of these indicative biases that are basically bringing you away from what the consumer actually thinks like and would answer like in surveys or qualitative interviews. Like we could also talk about this for hours, but just like super high level without going into any details. One is about basically like using data, right? So giving more power to the data and less power to the model itself. And the second one is basically using like not just getting LLMs to answer the question for you, but instead like wrapping around them like some kind of probabilistic mechanisms that basically allow you to bypass like all these issues.
Hmm, very interesting. So there are multiple levels to this, right? So there's a first, like the model that is built on, then the way to reinforce learning and
Yeah.
to explore if the yes no and which one is better. And then there is a layer of like aiding probability while retracting the data. Hmm,
Yes.
very interesting.
Exactly.
Very, very interesting. So, you mentioned you can do it with qual and quant groups. Isn't it
Yeah.
qual is too small of a sample?
So that's a good question. So basically, the way I think about this is actually what matters is to have wide data. So we can actually use transcripts, but what matters is to have as much information about the person itself that you're gonna twin as possible, rather than to have like thousands of people wide. And the goals are different. Like if I have 15 super long transcripts, I'm gonna be able to create digital twins that you can use in focus groups, for example. I'm not gonna be able to then get these 15 people to be turned into 1,000 twins. No, I'm going to turn them into 15 twins that you can interact with in focus groups, right? If you give me like a thousand, strong, quant responses, like a quant completes, then yes, you can create digital twins and run simulated quant surveys. But what really matters is to have wide data, to have a lot of information for each respondent. And the second thing that matters is to have basically cluttered categories. So to basically when you run for example, you're gonna use transcripts of an interview about snacks. Then you can use these digital twins to talk about snacks, but don't use them to talk about cars or about financial services or saving accounts. That's the main thing. So go as wide as you can on one category, and then you use these twins to optimize for things in that category. That's the main piece of our recipe that we really believe matters um, as part of all of this discussion.
Very interesting. So, like how in qualitative research, you actually don't need much data, right? You actually need only like
Yes.
12 respondents to and the role of the job is not to understand what they like or they don't like. You literally don't
Yes.
care, right? Your job is to understand what mental models they have and how
Hmm.
to apply those existing mental models into a different context. Is it
Correct.
similar to this idea or is it not similar to this idea?
It's exactly the same idea. So you're right. So basically that's why like optimally, so we also run research for our clients to build these audiences. So we also do that, and we basically built our own recipe for the optimal like sort of 15-minute survey that's gonna cover the parts that are gonna basically optimize for modeling the person. So I'm not gonna ask questions just like basically like for example, like if you look at massive brand funnel batteries that are super, they're not gonna optimize for what I need to predict new things for this client, even for these brands that would have been part of this crazy brand funnel. What matters is I give an example. Psychographics are super important to model the person because and they're gonna be very predictive of something that don't look like psychographics at all, right? And that's one example. Um, Another example is UNA style questions are extremely important. So if I know what are the main behaviors of this person, usage of some products, like what does its day-to-day look like from the perspective of this category, that's going to be extremely useful. So if you think about it, we built this recipe of a 50-minute survey that basically blends ideas from most of the different kinds of surveys that people run. So it's a 15-minute super compressed blend of segmentation style question, UNA style question, brand funnel style questions, and just a blend that basically covers a lot of items. and doesn't go deep on each of these parts. And that gives us basically the optimal 15-minute recipe to basically be able to be super predictive of new things. Because if I dream of a world where I could get like every respondent to spend 2 hours answering questions and then building twins of them, but that's just not feasible. So we just have to do with what we can, and what we can is build this optimal recipe of a 15-minute survey that does what you just described before.
Hmm. Okay, so you said modeling a person. How do you model a person?
Yeah. So first, you can simplify things, which is model the person from the perspective of a category. So you work right now in snacks. Let's only try to model what this person will think of new snacks, of ads of snacks, of the way snacks are presented on shelves. Like let's for example, if you just simplify to I'm trying to model how this person basically will react and think about snacks, that already simplifies your scope basically of what you have to take care of when you're basically modeling this person. So the main thing first is what data am I gonna have basically in hand to model things. So number one type of data is basically is gonna be survey data or transcripts. They're what I call individual level data. The second type of data is gonna be like aggregated like behavioral like the style of data, like like it can be like from the CRM data, like how often this person is buying from this product and coming to the store and blah blah blah. That's gonna be behavioral data. Then you have what I call performance data. So that can be marketing effectiveness style data, like history of my campaigns, performance of these campaigns, and so on, or like the sales data and so on. And then you have things like social listening, like what are the biggest trends on socials right now that people of different segments might care about, and so on. So you're gonna have all of these things. And now the question is, now modeling means in our world predicting answers of a specific person to a new question. That's what we're trying to model. Okay. And the main thing we do is basically first figure out what data points do I have across all of this data that I just mentioned that are going to be predictive of this, and how to aggregate them and weight them together in the right way to be able to do the optimal prediction. That's basically what modeling means in our world. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out how to get the right data, how to collect more data, how to organize this data on one hand, and then how to weight this data and how to put it together into a prediction that's going to be basically well predictive of what we're trying to predict.
Okay. So basically it's say data, do data, then influence of marketing campaigns, some sort of like influence impact, and then social listening. What will social
Yes.
listening play into this?
So if you think about it, you're trying to get your predictions to also evolve with time
Yeah.
because like all trends are moving so fast. Like talk about snacks, like maybe like this company just launched a campaign with like Kendall Jenner, for example, or whatever. Like and that's obviously gonna be something that's gonna impact like people. I'm just taking a random example, right? So basically, you also need your twins to evolve with whatever is happening, and social is like basically a very strong mirror of the world. Despite all of its the problems associated with it, it's a really good mirror of the world. So if you can actually tap into what's happening on social, you can actually tap into the world like very efficiently. So being able to have like a live access to what's happening on social related to the category you're trying to model is incredibly powerful and can also make the twins more refreshed and then basically and then predict things with time in mind. Because if you're just modeling from a survey that was run a year ago, then you're gonna be off. Like maybe some categories like still move very slowly, like notebooks, for example. But for most of these categories, opinions change all the time, and things can erupt like online or in the real world like all the time. So you really need to have a live stream of data coming from socials.
Hmm. Okay. So it sounds like it's understanding what are some factors, right? It's just like the same like
Yeah,
weighting thing, right? It's like and if competitors are going to take away or other market forces are going to take away from this. Okay. So it's say do, and then it's like what you do versus like what others do, basically. And it's
yeah,
all through a lens of for lots of consumer, how consumers respond to your marketing and how consumers respond to what's happening outside in the world. Hmm. Very
yes,
Okay, very cool. So you mentioned the flying use case, and basically the idea there is to understand what's the most important to people and then basically give it to them, right?
yes.
And So it sounds like one use case, right? So you're trying to understand how to build a loyalty program and to understand what are some of the things that are more
Yes.
important to those audiences and how your
Yes.
operations can respond to this. What are some other use cases?
So I like to split it into marketing.
Okay.
That's number one, and obviously there's many parts to marketing, but people usually use us for creative narrative and messaging sort of optimization. That's marketing. There's
How do you define narrative?
so narrative in our perspective is actually like fairly complex. Because the narrative of a brand has to be defined like per market, per segment, and so on. So basically, and that's what makes it very challenging. So what we allow doing basically is defining a brand narrative that's gonna evolve with the markets and the segments and the countries that basically they're actually evolving into, right? So and what is the right narrative that basically to have to optimize for whatever you're trying to optimize for. So you cannot have the same narrative when you're trying to optimize for, I don't know, 60 plus years old in the US and 18 years old or Gen Zs in France, right? So you need to basically optimize narrative for whomever you're trying to target.
Yeah.
So you have more like marketing like use cases. You have basically products, so everything on user experience, feature prioritization, like all these use cases and jobs to be done, like all these kinds of different frameworks where it's always about how can I generate more value for my client? How can I remove frustration and friction basically to unlock more wide scale adoption? So all these types of use cases or again, like UX, for example, UX research, right, is a massive market, but at the same time, it's like right now, like developers ship features like on a daily basis, and they ship new features all the time. So the rate of development has accelerated incredibly, which means that basically, like a lot of things don't get tested as they used to be because of timelines. So we are bringing an intermediate solution that actually allows to basically still preserve the quality of like consumer insights and consumer feedback without having to basically drastically like reduce the time to reach like real people.
Mhm.
So that's products. Then you have everything around what I like to think of as a basically is profiling and segmentation. So and that's related. That's gonna be used as part of marketing and product, but that's really about like knowing, understanding, and prioritizing and segmenting your audience basically. So that's all of it is about basically now that I have unlock access to all of this massive audience. Now I can work really hard and message as a data and the population to basically understand who cares about what I'm trying to offer and they are and where can I find them and what do I need to tell them, blah blah blah. So that's gonna be basically like sort of orthogonal to marketing, product, customer experience, and all these other things I was talking about. So that's a very strong use case for basically pretty much everything we're doing. But at the same time, so I'm categorizing things in marketing, product, customer experience, profiling, and segmentation. But at the same time, I like to also take like another completely like a sort of orthogonal direction in terms of talking about the potential of this and talk about use cases. So not to talk about like sort of large categories, but for example, talk about churn. Like banks, right now, for example, we're working with various banks across different countries. They care about two things: churn and cross-selling opportunities. So basically, so the question is, what can you do? What can, for example, unlocked consumer access open basically in terms of opportunities to solve these challenges that these banks care about? Or, for example, companies are that are fighting, for example, indie brands, right? So like large enterprise brands are trying to fight on a turf where it's basically now an unfair competition because these companies are able to move so fast in terms of socials, for example. And so they're trying to basically be able to get this extra velocity. So there's many. So I like to think in terms of actual use cases and challenges rather than categorize into marketing, sales, and so on. But yeah, that's two different axes for looking at basically the value of all of these things.
So I keep hearing this idea that you're doing basically in the way how traditional innovation works, right? Like you ask the question, what problem
Yeah.
can we solve? And we assume that by solving the problem, consumer will be happier, will choose
Yeah.
us, or whatever else will happen. And I think it's super valid. And I'm curious how it works on the opposite side, right? Sometimes it's not about solving problem, but rather than delivering some sort of delightful experience, right? How do we think about this? Because this feels like a very different type of data.
Um, so from the innovation, just starting with innovation.
Hmm.
So what I there's two schools. You have
Okay.
the Steve Jobs school. It's like, anyway, like don't talk to the people because like they don't know what they want. And you have another school which I'm more part of, as much as I love Steve Jobs and what he built, where if you can actually go really deep into understanding like this segments and people you care about, you can actually sort of guess what they will like next. So I'm more of this school. So I really think that these technologies are incredibly useful for innovation and innovative thinking. Because when you have access to, what these people use in their day-to-day, what are their concerns, their pain points, like what they care about for, from the perspective of their family, what are the things they're missing in their day-to-day, what are the things they're trying to optimize for, and then you have aggregated data on, like, from in other countries, this is how people are doing, and potentially they're happier because they have access to these tools. So you have all of this amazing data and if it's very well organized and standardized and centralized and so on. And basically, it's reasonable to think that you're actually going to be able to bring like innovative ideas and solutions by basically finding all the signal into all of this mess of data, right? So that's how I think of innovative thinking and innovation in the sense of basically trying to predict it through a very strong model of these audiences you're trying to optimize for. And if like, let's say you know someone so deeply and also know basically people in other markets that have had similar problems, you're gonna be able to basically cross-reference things very efficiently and then find the right solutions. So that's my opinion on this. But again, there are different schools in terms of like how innovation should be done, and some people think you should trust less like what the consumer says. But yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. So, I'm going to ask one question about UX design specifically, and then I'm going to ask
Yeah.
about like different examples as well, about like
Yes.
platform, etc., etc. So, asking about the UX design.
Yes.
So, you know how in UX you have like this concept of heuristics, right?
Yes.
Like everybody knows that like you read the first line and then you go down, you read a little bit here. So it's like in the design world, right, you have like the F letter as like the thing.
Yes.
And then by knowing design principles, you can predict, right, without any machines, anything, but just sheerly by understanding how human brain works, right? So, and every time when I think about like UX tests through AI, right? I don't see the difference between those two things, right? How is it different from an expert point of view of a designer who like you can look through, it's like okay, this and this important, this one people are going to ignore. What do you think?
It's a brilliant question. It's a really good question. So I'll tell you what I think. So what I said just before, the previous question is actually like the first step in all of this is to understand who you're trying to sell to and why and who they are and what they care about, right? So what you were saying just now about like design principles and design system, all those things, you're right, in principle. But actually, the problem is that the population, if you look at from the US population, like you're gonna need to optimize very uh, differently if you're trying to sell to seniors or if you want to try to sell to Gen Zs, right? Like the things that matter from the UX perspective are extremely different, right? So first step from my perspective is to understand who you're trying to sell to and what they care about, right? And that's basically the starting point of this. And then like it gets complicated. So once you know this and you know the right blend, like and the right segments that you care about and how they blend, you still need to make decisions in terms of like where you're gonna put the cursor. Like for example, like let's say do you need like a very long like onboarding experience with all of these steps, or actually you want something super short, like 2, 3 steps, and then figure it out. And young people, like younger people, want like very short onboardings because like they're used to just looking at 8 second like TikTok videos. But older people like longer onboarding journeys and so on. So the question is who you're trying to optimize for, what do they care about, what are the things that will optimize chances of success. And that takes more than just basically design principle. Like design principle only get you one step of the way, then but then you can optimize things further by knowing what users want. And then you can also, for example, right now there's this massive trend in UX on adaptive experiences, right? So you're not gonna see the same thing if you're in this country, or that country, or if you're old or young, or if you're shopped in this kind of shops. So there's this massive trend right now on adaptive design. And that's basically using the same idea. Like if you know who's in front and you can optimize the design for whoever is in front, and you're gonna get like higher chance of conversion. So that's basically why I still believe that there's basically a role to play for these kinds of consumer-oriented models in terms of basically optimizing the journeys to those target segments and audiences you care about, and to squeeze more juice and more values. And sometimes like even 1 more % on this metric can actually be very useful to the business, and that's what consumer understanding and access can bring.
Hmm. Okay, very interesting. So you have just mentioned it's an interesting question. Why do you think it's an interesting question? Because I feel like you thought a lot about this. Therefore, there are some very interesting challenges behind this question. And I'm actually very curious about like what challenges you've noticed.
In UX specifically?
Yes.
In UX specifically, yeah, of course. So let's talk about the technical part for now. So let's talk about how you model, for example, like we're trying to model from UX testing or and digital twins of UX testing. We're trying to model how a specific type of person with this characteristic is going to basically travel through, for example, this onboarding journey, right? But the main thing is like humans, as you're saying, when that quirks are irrational, they're acting very differently, they have different backgrounds, like with some more technical, some less technical. So it's basically very hard to predict like how these people are gonna behave, like when they're exposed to a new app or a new interface, right? It's extremely hard. So it's and basically you need to bake into this like computer use models, or basically these models are gonna interact with these interfaces. You're gonna need to build a lot more like inductive biases of how humans of different types interact with interfaces in order to make sure that you're actually going to be aligned with how the humans you're trying to model would have explored a specific interface. So that's extremely hard. So when we're talking about emotions earlier, so you have to bake in emotions like somehow into these models and irrationality, like that's something. And you have to bake in how they'll basically interacts when exposed with a completely net new app interface. It's an earlier game and it's much harder. So we had to do a lot of work. And for example, the way we started things was basically look at very simple interfaces. For example, a landing page. How is it gonna react when they see this landing page? Like, and predict like whether they'll have a long look at the CTA or the messaging or this image or that image. So start simple and then build up. And that's sort of basically how we've been tackling this. But yeah, this is an extremely hard problem, and that's basically
Hmm.
the main thing. But if you're again just trying to say an LLM, okay, move through this interface and tell me what you think, you're not you're gonna be very far from how real humans of different types are gonna interact with this interface.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So basically, it sounds like the more net new things are, the more we have to rely on the loss of average and on basically on heuristics and stereotypes rather
Yes, that's
than
correct.
thinking on the back on the historic stuff.
That's correct.
Fascinating. Fascinating. So one of the things that I'm going to be like the last remark, and then I'm going to ask you to share the platform if you don't mind. So the thing that I heard, right, that at Kirk's, that it's better not to use AI for net new research, right? The moment you have to do net new, don't do it. But you are saying you can do it. You just have to rely on different
Yeah.
set of data.
Yeah, I think that's completely wrong. Like the net new don't do net new research. I think it's absolutely wrong. I think it's all a question of stakes. So I would say that do it for net new research, actually. So I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna tell you how I think about things. I think that digital twins and the methodology around digital twins are absolutely amazing at two things. One is pre-testing, and the second one is iterative work. So if you think about like one project, you may have the chance to have budget and time to run one field potentially, right? But maybe like you're gonna wait like some time, and potentially the insights are not gonna be like super deep, or potentially you're gonna get great feedback, and so you're gonna be able to improve your billboards, for example. But let's say before running this field, you had been able to basically do 10 iterations with a fairly accurate model of your audience. And it's absolutely incredible because you're gonna get pre-filled to a much better state and space of options than what you would have had if you didn't have this technology in hand. So I don't think it's a matter of net new or not net new or whatever. I think it's really a matter of basically what are the decisions you're gonna make with it. Is the final decision for a $10 million or $100 million investment? Definitely no. Is it something that's gonna get you closer to a strong candidate to to actually test on in the real world for a 10 or $100 million decision? Yes, 100%. That's basically how my philosophy towards thinking about what you can do and what you can't.
Okay, so it's about fidelity of the answer rather than if the answer is net
And
new.
the stakes, fidelity and stakes.
Okay, love it. Okay, shall we talk about the platform?
Let's do it. Sounds
Yeah.
great.
Yes.
Um, so should I talk about the product and how it's organized? Like
Yeah,
what do you want
maybe. I
to learn
think for
more?
me the most helpful thing, think about like the the article flow, right? For me, the most helpful thing would be to put a print screen of a thing that it looks like, right? And like to have like maybe even like a quick recording of how it looks like. You type an answer and a person like I'm not a person, right? I mean, it would answer something, right? So yeah.
Yes.
For me, it would be the
Exactly.
most helpful. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I'm also happy to actually share
Oh
my
yeah.
screen so you can actually see, but just for the purposes of the discussion, right? Not for sales. We're not trying to sell things here.
To me,
Uh, no,
like
of
yeah,
course.
I like what would I buy? Oh yeah, what's your price policy though?
Yeah, so I think that's really
Yeah.
custom, right? So it's really custom. Like we're working with large enterprise brands, so it's usually like kind of custom pricing. We charge per category, like
Okay.
that they're gonna use us for. Um, but basically, just to show you super quickly here, sharing is not turned on. Actually,
Oh,
I think you have to
okay.
give me
Yeah,
a
I can
chance.
do this then. Here we go.
Perfect. So that's the product.
Okay.
Um, and so basically, there's many capabilities. First thing is like you have your audiences that you're managing here. So
Hmm.
these audiences are like data vaults. Like they're gonna own all these different data categories that we were talking about earlier. And as you see here, there are very specific categories like wearables, smart home buyers, like and there's going to be the vault, and each of them are going to have like different amounts of respondents. So this one has 410 digital twins. It's based on a real deep study on fresh produce and salad buyers, and the twins were basically twins, the people who were twinned, and that's basically the people you see here. So the images and names are generated, but these people are anchored in well, like one-to-one with a real person. So it's not a persona, it's really a one-to-one digital twin of a real person that you can talk about fresh produce and salad buyers. So we've been really involved in the last couple of weeks with Cyclospora, which is this massive bacteria outbreak in the US. That's really bad and related to lettuce and helping basically like our grocery players and customers basically react in the optimal way to this outbreak. So there's different modes like conversations, like deep studies, and they aim at basically solving different kinds of issues. So there's both templates like the ad testing, landing page testing, concept testing, pricing testing, like all these things that we're talking about. And you can also do like fully exploratory research. You can build a completely custom questionnaire or some questionnaire that's basically going to be templated. So that's an example of a questionnaire on like Cyclospora, and like, has been built with this agent, you can also update the agent anyway. So that's basically how you
Can we
create
try
like
something?
a brief. Yeah, of course. Let's do it just now. But just finishing this, so you basically get a deck and insights, and you can download the data, and you can ask like new questions to this respondent. But
Yeah.
just to just to get take this from all the cyclospora example, I'm just gonna take this audience of fresh produce inside buyers. You can also filter the audience on different demographics, like younger people, for example. And then we're gonna basically like I say, I want to figure out what is the right messaging to reassure young customers in terms of the low risk of buying lettuce despite the cyclospora outbreak. Uh, okay. So basically, there's going to be this agent, and iteratively, you give it this brief, you can ask new questions. It's going to build basically a questionnaire with you, and you can give it feedback. So you have this questionnaire, and it's basically asking, what is your immediate reaction to this message, and you can basically now write a message. So we're going to basically write a message here, and that's going to be like let's say like let us unrecalled. That's like whatever. That's fine. So, what is your immediate reaction to this message about letter safety? So basically, the people are exposed to this message. Explain the context of the study. How much do you trust it? How clear it is? Blah blah blah. What makes this message reassuring? What information we still want before feeling comfortable buying lettuce? So you get all it builds all of these questions in an ad hoc way, right? And then you can basically launch the study, and then you're gonna have like 50 twins of this audience and twins of people that are buying like a fresh produce and salads in supermarkets regularly that are gonna basically respond to this uh, deep 10 questions survey. Deep because it was matrix questions, many options, and so on. So you're gonna launch this study, right? And then say like 15 minutes later, you're basically gonna get like this full insights experience with this full deck with recommendations and insights and both qualitative, so that's quant and that's qual, so that's basically can be like quotes of the respondents to the and answers to open-ended questions and all of these decks, and then you can do many things like you can edit the deck, send it over, and you have the data, and you can also chat basically to respondents directly and ask them net new questions. Say, hi Sarah, sorry, Sarah. And she's just gonna answer, and you can send her like pictures, websites, like etc. etc. So it's pretty deep. So you can do a lot of things here, and then you can share the study around, and we're adding a lot more features. But yeah, you have deep studies. You also have quick studies, which is another mode that's basically allowing you to just talk to a panel and ask questions iteratively that way and get quotes, teams, and so on. So there's a lot of things like that you can do through this product, but most of it basically is to be able to test things iteratively, really fast, and just like do a lot more iterations before getting to the right launch candidates.
Okay. So it sounds like it's about iteration and pre-testing.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, correct.
Because it's like it's a build, measure, learn. It's early stages when we don't
Yes,
have that much of the commitment to the thing. Okay.
correct.
Okay. Very cool. Very, very cool. Okay, it's 7:20 on the East Coast. So I'm going to, to wrap it up, I guess. Okay. My last question would be, if there is one thing that what you believe people understand completely wrong, because you've been in the industry for 5 years, right? And you've been doing it for so
Yes.
long, and you have so many no's. You've heard so many no's. What do you think one thing people understand completely wrong about the technology, digital twins, or anything else in this realm of
Yeah,
AI and research?
I think the main thing is people are thinking of synthetic as one thing, and the main problem is like basically like they're trying to put it into a box and then define things about synthetic, but that makes no sense. Like the main need to differentiate different things about synthetic. Like one is what data is it powered on? What is the methodology that's basically using this data to predict things? What are the stakes of the decisions you're going to make with this methodology? And based on all of these aspects, you can actually judge whether a workflow using synthetic is makes sense or not. But you cannot say I'm pro synthetic, I'm against synthetic. Like for example, I define myself in a panel like and Quirks as a cautious optimistic for synthetic because I don't agree with everything like some synthetic players are doing, right? It's like pure synthetic panels are trying to model the general US population makes no sense in my opinion, right? So whereas they're just like basically taking a US census like data and then asking LLMs like you are an 18-year-old living in this region making this income. Now tell me what you think about this snack. That makes no sense. There's no chance that's gonna work out well. But so you need to specify what data is powering it, what's the methodology around it, and what are the stakes to be able to judge if something makes sense or not. So basically, what I recommend is to not put things into boxes and ask these questions. What is the data? What is the methodology? What are the stakes we can use it for? And then you can actually judge whether it makes sense.
Okay, awesome. All right, that's the last question I had. I'm going to press stop recording.